So open source is a common public good, which is not owned by anybody. It's owned by all of humanity, and it's for human progress. And so that's why I think critical information infrastructures need to be anti-fragile, and for them to be anti-fragile, the core tenet has to be open source.
Hello, Mindplexers. Hello, community. And welcome to another podcast of our Dream Wonders series, where I have as guest an amazing polymath, serial entrepreneur, and inventor, Kartik. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mihaela, for having me. It's always a pleasure speaking to you.
Your education is a blend of computer science, economics, finance from leading universities in the world, such as the Royal Institute in Sweden, Norwegian Business School, Fudan University in China. I mean, you lived all over the globe. You are a citizen of the universe. You are one of the most amazing thinkers that I encountered and a pioneer in many areas among which I would name now in the beginning, yes, quantum, artificial intelligence, and blockchain. And among many others, you founded one of the world's first neural networks applied to social discovery. And it's called Spouse Up, or it was called Spouse Up, which I find it a very, very interesting name. So the neural network was featured by leading magazines like The Economist and newspapers around the world as a novel innovation. And it was acquired in 2017. Can you tell us just, to get us started and to get to know you a bit about this particular invention of yours, what drove it, and just a little bit of its story?
Absolutely, man. So this was back in 2011, 2012. I just, was a PhD candidate back in Norway, and I submitted my thesis. I was taking a break in India. I was meditating in a place called Oroville. So trying to learn this form of yogic technique called integral yoga. And I got this idea that India is one of the largest population countries, with one of the largest populations in the world, and a lot of young people, the youngest population in the world. And a lot of these guys are all these different websites trying to find each other. So I think this human contextual discovery was a very important problem, and there's nobody who was solving it in a meaningful way. And I was always interested in AI. I was, I'd spent 10 years working for large American tech before that. I played around with neural networks. And that was a time when social networks were taking off, 2011, 2012. Everybody was on Facebook, everybody was on Twitter, everybody was on Instagram. We had Google Plus, which no longer exists now. So there were like dozens of social networks that time, right? Everybody was on social networks producing massive amounts of data. And I said, why is nobody using this to understand people better? So I created the world's first neural network for social discovery, for helping people discover each other better. So we created an AI called Mommy.ai. So this Mommy.ai would basically go into Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, understand how you're thinking, and based on how you're thinking, based on the books you read, the music you listen to, the places you've traveled to, you'll create a profile of who you are, and then find other people who you might find interesting. So this became a novel innovation back in 2011, 2012. I mean, teaching neural networks how to discover people who are similar, and that's how it started. It got featured everywhere, mostly in a lot of Indian newspapers, by The Economist in London. Became a very novel innovation at that time. There are a lot of YouTube videos that people search for it. People come out and say why they love this thing. And so, yeah, I've always been this,
And
this
yes, and
guy
if
who
I
likes to
may
apply.
say, Kartik, that so let's underline this was 2011, right? And just now the world is waking up to, oh, I want to have my personalized AI on my iPhone or whatever. In those times it was impossible. Yeah, we say technologically, but you were ahead of the game and you designed. I would say that's how I would see it, the first personalized, let's say, Copilot, yes, which people can use and it can cater to their needs. So it's something unbelievable and amazing that you pioneered at the time. But let me, this kind of leads me, and of course I want to talk much more about that, but I have so many questions, Kartik, so that's why I want to move to the burning question for us here as singularitarians, and that is, with your experience from then and for putting this powerful technology and envisioning it already in 2011 in people's hands, yes, to help them personally. So let's talk a bit about human, and I don't know if I should call it versus or and artificial intelligence. Like, what would to you would be the difference? Let's talk about that first.
Well, I think it's a very profound question. I think it's I wouldn't say it $1 billion question, but $1 trillion question. Because I mean, like, if first of all, we need to understand what intelligence is to describe what is human versus machine intelligence. So, I mean, English is a very interesting language. I mean, we say research because researching something that's already out there. It's called researching, and thought comes from the ancient Greek. The ancient Egyptian called Thoth. Was a considered to be one of the great gods of Egypt, and so I think thoughts, ideas, how we perceive our reality, how we socially construct reality, all of these things are, a form of intelligence, and human intelligence is very contextual to human beings. Whereas machine intelligence is, I don't know if we can call it intelligence. So this is why I've created this new nomenclature, which I unraveled for the first time in Dubai when I was speaking to another person from Singularity or Singularity Now on a panel discussion. So somebody asked this question, human versus non-human. I call this local and non-local intelligence. So local intelligence is what, garbage in, garbage out. You feed the data to the machine has these models. The model comes up with different types of permutation combinations of the data. Inferences could be support vector machines, random walks, regression clustering, all kinds of ways to visualize, process data, and create meaningful outputs out of it. Whereas human intelligence is fundamentally very different, right? I mean, there is a concept that they call the holonomic brain theory, which basically states that it's an entire branch of neuroscience investigating the idea between human consciousness is found by quantum effects in between brain cells. I'm also a spiritualist. I spend time in monasteries. I meditate. So, I mean, in ancient Vedic sciences, we call it prana. That this biological intelligence that human beings have this thing called prana, and there are a lot of interesting experiments that are being conducted recently. In this area, a lot of research is being done on something called a subtle energy, this prana, which is the foundational idea behind all of the Asian societies. So if you go to China, they call it chi. You go to Japan, it's called ki. In India, it's called prana. And entire civilizations are designed around it. So in fact, there's a paper by a series of Japanese researchers, Sugano, Uchida, and Kuramoto, on basically studying this subtle energy, to study this prana. The Germans of the last century called it Vril. I mean, there are a whole host of research that went into this during the First and Second World War, and people have since then tried to understand this better. So there's a lot of interesting research is being done on subtle energy, on brain as this antenna, not as only just the hardware to process information, but also receive. There's also this idea that there's a quantum field of information that the brain is able to tap into. Like why did people across the world discover electromagnetism, electricity, simultaneously, right? There was Marconi who discovered radio waves, and there was other people across the world talking about it at the same time. So I think there are a lot of things about the nature of this reality. I mean, that needs to be uncovered, and I call science and ISIS cult. Religions are also ISIS cults, and we can talk about.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yes,
we talk
I
about
agree.
this detail.
Yeah, so let's maybe go even deeper. I don't want to say move on from this because this is so exciting, and your background definitely, I mean, enables us to have an outstanding conversation on the topic. Yes. So you mentioned so many things there, and I'm going to unpack just a few of them, which kind of stood out. So the electric currents, right? And I think this is very relevant right now with Neuralink. But guess what? Yes, they also work on that, and it's a discovery which Galvani has made in the 1770 something years. Where with electrodes, yes, and we are doing that in school. I've done that in school, yes. So he has seen that let's say dead frogs, if you put electrons, then their legs are moving and oh, the body is electric and the brain is electric, and this is what Neuralink is using. And so of course there's so much we know and we don't apply, so much we know we cannot prove, like the speed of light, right? That's an old one, but we know it, and it exists. And of course also with quantum as well. So I'm just, coming back to the initial question of human versus artificial intelligence. Yes, it's not easy to say what is the difference. I mean, I think you described and took us on a journey in your answer to what would be human intelligence and the limitations of AI to achieve that. What is the difference? It's we cannot say, first of all, because we cannot really define human intelligence, because we are, exactly as you say, we're still in this separate world of science and then the spirituality, and spirituality has so much to contribute to consciousness. We will get there. We will get there. But my next question is, so obviously my next question would have been, can we ever achieve human intelligence with machines? But I think you already answered that we don't know. Yes, we don't know, because we don't know what we want to achieve. How can we know it? But Ray Kurzweil is looking at the singularity as the phenomenon when machines will exceed our intelligence. So probably they will achieve human intelligence. But what do you think that would take?
So, a lot of these tests about human intelligence, Mihaela, like for example the Turing tests, they're all very rudimentary, right? I mean, and there is no classification of what intelligence is. There's social intelligence, there's emotional intelligence, there's so many different forms of intelligence. There's empathy, there's love, there are so many things that are based on biology, it's based on chemistry, right? Based on biochemical reactions in the body. And there's a lot of intelligence based on that. So I mean, it's not like, I think it's like modern science is 100 years old, right? I mean, Wright brothers flew the first plane in 1904, and we've built rockets, we've gone to space, we've done all of these things, but we still, our exploration of the human mind, this is the ultimate frontier: consciousness, intelligence, subtle energies. I mean, the Indians call it yogic science, right? I mean, the idea of creating these temples, creating subtle energies in them, all of that stuff, right? So there's an entire area of research that goes into, first of all, understanding and defining what is intelligence, and then defining what is machine intelligence, what is human intelligence, how does these things differ, what is human, right? I mean, then we basically go to the question of what is a human. Like, let's say if we're able to create biological beings that can think, right? I mean, let's say we have neurons on a petri dish that are able to think and process information. It's this whole idea of the vat in the brain assimilation, right? Like you put two electrodes in a brain, then put the vat in the brain thing. Is it alive? Is it dead? Is it, what kind of intelligence is that? So I think, there's greater need to understand, quantify, get deeper into some of these things before we can even, start comparing these two. I mean, machine intelligence for me is, it's still simulation, right? I mean, machines can't come up with like original ideas that we have, because I believe it's based on the higher fields of intelligence and knowledge, quantum fields that exist out in nature, and that we're able to tap into different cycles of time, and there's cosmology, there's planetary science, there's so many things that come in, and we only started to scratch the surface in some of these areas, right? I mean, like for example, the field of subtle energy, the field of non-local intelligence, brain as transducer. It's not just a processing device, but as a transducer. People are working on this research because you have to apply the scientific methodology, right, to unveil Isis. Isis is considered to be nature, goddess of nature, right? I mean, Hinduism's Isis cult. We have Saraswati, the goddess of language. We have Shekinah in Judaism. And the goddess of nature, the god who holds all the secrets, who's veiled, uh, is Isis in Egypt, right? And there is this great book by Madame Blavatsky called Isis Unveiled, where she goes deep into this idea of Isis, and how she says that, I mean, uh, there's this beautiful statue as well, the Veil of Isis, in the Egyptian city called Sais. It's written by these Greco-Roman authors. The statue says of the veiled goddess with the inscription in Egyptian, which says, "I'm all that has been and is and shall be, and no mortal has ever lifted my mantle." Right. So this is the scientific method. We're trying to lift the mantle of Isis. Isis is the embodiment of nature, right? All that we see, all that we know, and it's not easy. We just learning to crawl back. So I think these are bigger questions, and I don't think there are easy answers. I mean, people are trying to simplify and say, "Oh, artificial general intelligence." I mean, what does it mean?
Yes, I agree, and thank you for this, perspective. I mean, it's really kind of blowing my mind here. I even don't know where to start to follow up. But there are a few things which again come to mind, and I can probably unpack from all what you said, and we can dive into that even deeper because I'm so curious to learn from you. So, but you see, again, coming back to the cult of science, if I can call it like that, which is somehow limiting us, and on the other side also expanding us. And I'll give you two examples which I think you more or less touched, giving other examples like Matthew McDougall, the chief surgeon of Neuralink, was interviewed recently by Lex Friedman, and he said something which I like I was stunned when I heard, and it's uh, if I mean everybody is hearing that obviously, as Lex has a wide audience, and I'm wondering what would you think of it. And I have so many other follow-up questions. So he said that consciousness is us. So what he is doing, he is implanting Neuralink electric electrodes in people's brain. There's only one, the first one, who has one such Neuralink, and he can already play competitive video games just with his thoughts, which is amazing. Yeah, so he kind of knows a lot. They know a lot about the structure of the brain, and uh, he says that consciousness is us feeling our brain electrical activity when we are touched, when we taste something, when we think of something, like in his case that he is beating by thinking those video games, when we think of someone. And there is no grand quantum map or celestial scheme involved here. And, so you've been running Quantum Hermit, a quantum AI focused R&D lab since 2019. And I will get to my questions in a second, but I just want to say also, when you alluded to that this non-locality, which is exactly what quantum is about, and quantum scientists are proving, although they were quarreling about it for some time. So quantum scientists also like said that reality is not material. Yes, it's like it's like we have headsets that they were looking through those headsets, and that's why we see the material things, because it's our evolution which has built us like that, uh, uh, anyway. So the question is if we aren't able to tap into the true reality, which is the quantum reality, obviously we will not be able to create machines that are going to tap into that. Or do you think that once we get machines smart enough, they will be able to exceed our intelligence and be able to tap into that?
So I think it's a wonderful question. I think very long, but very interesting, very detailed question. I think it's but it's very important. You can't shorten this question either, right? We have to go and look at what is
Yeah, I mean,
already
I
happening,
cannot
and it's
ask a yes or no question when you talk
exactly,
about
exactly.
this. Yes.
But it's a very, very profound, and you very beautifully put it, Mihaela, because there's a story of the blind man and the deaf man trying to describe the elephant, right? So one guy looks at the trunk and he says this is the trunk is the elephant. The other guy looks at the tail and he says the tail is the elephant. So I think this ISIS cult, which is called science, our methodologies are not well formed, right? We don't have the vocabulary to describe a lot of these things. Right? I mean, the human body is so much more older. It has evolved in so many different phases. And modern science is only 100 years old. So we don't have the tools, we don't have the measuring techniques, we don't have the methodology even to basically describe. So that's why I think we have to, we both of us like Capra, and we've had discussions before this, and Capra talks about the Tao of physics, where there's benefit in the Eastern and the Western, the scientific methodology that we have in the West, and the Eastern philosophy of the way of life that they've lived. When they talk about non-localative intelligence, there was this project back in 2009 called the Avatar Project, with Ray Kurzweil and everybody else. It was in Moscow, and the world was a much nicer place, happier place. Scientists from India, from Russia, from the US, Israel, all kinds of countries were there. The idea was to create the avatar, the human avatar. And I was involved in the project, and I'd invited to go to Moscow. And I was doing my PhD at the time in 2009. So I mean, I could go because it's PhD student. But I just followed what they're doing. And so we had this guy called Pilot Baba, who's somebody who can basically, do spatio-temporal travel. He's very well known for it. I think he was a subject of a lot of scientific studies on how the mind can travel outside the body. So, I mean, the way that mind can travel in space and time is currently being studied. There are a lot of experiments in the US and other countries where they're looking at the mind. The brain and the mind are different, right? The brain is the physical hardware, the mind is the software, and then you also have the antenna, which is the quantum field. So, the Indians call it the Akasha, the Akashic record, or whatever there is. So I think the interesting thing is no scientific progress can be made without speculation, right? But we also have to have the discipline of the scientific method, because we need to understand why the scientific method came in the first place. I mean, Europe was destroyed by the bubonic plague in the 13th century, where half of the population was wiped out. So we didn't have to rely on the gods. We didn't have to wait for the gods. So the goal for the man was to become and operate the realm of the gods through age of rationalism, the age of Renaissance, right? Applying the scientific method to unveiling Isis, unveiling nature, understanding the secrets that it holds, and so that's what we did. But to basically ask those questions, we need to know what questions to ask, right? And that's why I think the language of spirituality, the going deeper into the scriptures, definitely have it's Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism. They all have deep secrets hidden deep inside them, right? I mean, like buried. And our job is to start using the scientific method to see if we can validate some of it. So that's what it is, and that's why a lot of my worlds are converging, right? It was my spiritual side of things, where you go and explore the scriptures. There are
Yes.
ciphers inside them, right? You have to know how to read them to understand what they're saying, because the same text can have 4 or 5 different meanings. And so this is also the idea that we're not the first smart version of humanity. I mean, there have been way smarter versions of us who have come and gone, and so some of the
Yeah.
records are encoded in the scriptures. And so how do we bring all of these things together? So these are interesting questions, Mihaela, and I think we need to start applying the scientific method to validate some of these things that we find, and
Exactly. And that
unlock
is to
them.
observe and acknowledge. And there
Exactly.
is a new awareness about this. And of course, Capra was aware of it long ago when he wrote the Tao of Physics, obviously. Yes, I mean, and it's a book which I really recommend to our listeners here wholeheartedly, as you reminded me of it. And but there is this new kind of awakening going on now. Many people are talking about this Aquarius era, that we're entering that, and that there's like a new awareness that actually, yeah, about this. I don't know how to call them, truths, new new perspectives. But still coming back to, and of course, again, not an easy question. It will be much shorter though how I will phrase it now. As I mentioned initially, AI and human intelligence. Now, I want to move with you to consciousness and intelligence. How do they relate? What do you think?
So I mean, we have very limited research on consciousness. I mean, as long as as far as I've basically studied. There's a lot of research that is coming out recently, but last 20, 30 years ago, there's not much. I think AI has basically spurred a lot of this, interest in consciousness, because people are beginning to, ask these questions. What is this thing, right? I mean, we have this thing which we think is called consciousness, which is keeping us alive, aware. We probably have this, quantum information field inside us called the soul, which is indestructible, which just keeps coming back and forth in different lifetimes and learns. But how can we measure it? How can we use a scientific method? And so, I mean, I've been reading quite a bit on this because of my interest in AI, quantum AI, the company that I built in AI, which is SpouseUp. And especially this whole explosion of AI that's happened in the last, 4 or 5 years with GPT and everything else. So there's a very interesting book by Yuri Kron. So he was a Russian physicist who moved to the US. I think it was in the University of Hawaii. So he says modern physics can measure energy such as in the electromagnetic spectrum. But he says that these energies only account for 4% of the total identifiable mass energy in the universe, right? What makes up the remaining 96%? So we call it dark energy, dark matter, right? So he says in this scientifically based yet accessible analysis, right, where he does a lot of analysis on this, he says the ancient called it the life force. So dark energy is called life force or prana or chi. And Kron in his life's work, he spent 40 years working on this. Shows how subtle energy, belongs to subatomic field, and how it follows laws that are fundamentally different from that we already know. The whole Newtonian Cartesian physics. So he also did a lot of work on the interaction of subtle energy with physical matter and with the human body, and he shows how the mind interacts with matter by means of subtle energy, giving us the key to understanding the placebo effects and extrasensory perception, as well as the healing powers of affirmation and energy medicine. It's a whole area of medicine, presenting positive affirmations, prayers. I mean, it's there in Christianity, it's there in
Definitely.
Hinduism, it's
And
there
it
in all kinds
works.
of, and it
Yes.
works, right? And
Yes.
so it uses a
Speaking
scientific
of
method,
scientific method, yes. I
right?
mean, you observe and it works. So,
Right.
yes.
So
Yeah.
there was research that was conducted. I mean, there was he spent 40 years working on this. So the work of Ichida and others in Japan, I think again is a very interesting area. But we are at very early stages, Neil. I mean, very very early stages of this. So there's a long
Yes.
way to
And
go.
yes, and of course, there's a long way to go, but I still will have some questions, and then I will move to more terrestrial topics. Just maybe one more remark here, and this is totally aligned, yes, with what you said. In spite of that interview with the chief surgeon, which was on the same podcast, it's an 8 hour podcast, which Lex Friedman has done recently with Neuralink. Various people working there with important jobs, and there was also a cognitive scientist who he discussed with, and that cognitive scientist, he showed an image, and there were some gaps over there, and they couldn't understand what's happening with the brain and why is this happening, and he called it, he said, yes, dark energy. So he mentioned that, and I think they also spoke about this placebo effect and these things which our science at the moment and cognitive science cannot explain, and this phenomenology. And I think that also, I mean, Neuralink is also a way for researchers to tap into this unknown yet, yes, aspects which are not, I mean, they are observed, they are not deeply explained, as we know science is using a lot of metaphors, like for electrons, which say they go on orbits around the atom. There are no orbits for electrons. What are they? Are they particles? Are they waves? Are they probabilities clusters? And still we represent them with these metaphors so that we understand that chemists can work
Exactly.
with the periodic table. And
Exactly.
it's
I
the
mean,
same where we are.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, also, I mean, the field of quantum research took off during the Second World War. When we the Americans wanted to pursue the bomb, and all the nuclear physicists like Bohr and Einstein, everybody else moved to the U.S. and started building this. I mean, a lot of people, these guys are all laughed at. They said, the Jewish physics was the German physics and the superiority of all of this. So nobody took the quantum nature of reality seriously. But it was inscribed in various textures. Whether it's Judaism, whether it's Hinduism, it is deeply down. I mean, the nature of this reality is quantum. It exists in If things exist in multiple states at the same time, there are parallelism. A very simple experiment is this double slit experiment, right? Where you send a photon, then sometimes it behaves like a wave, the other time it behaves like a particle. And the other interesting thing is, so there's a Copenhagen interpretation, which basically states that until you observe it, I mean, it's both and all that stuff. But I mean, there is no conclusive theory which describes the quantum reality, which means that we have not done enough experiments. We don't have the methodology itself is flawed. The methodology that we use right now itself is flawed. So we need to have better methodology to do this. And the other interesting thing that people are not able to explain is this idea that if humanity becomes multiplanetary, if we go to Mars, if we go to Alpha Centauri, or we cannot use light. Light is slow. We cannot use lasers to communicate, right? So we'll have to use quantum entanglement. So we'll have to entangle, photons, electrons, and then send them across vast distances. And the only way to communicate will be through quantum communications. But how does this work, right? So you take a electron or a photon, you entangle it, and then you take the other one, the pair, and then you take to vast distances across the galaxy. You change this electron, the other electron or photon, the particle will change simultaneously. So it means that something is connecting them. There is a field, right? So all of these points in space and time are somehow connected, through this field of dark matter, dark energy, consciousness, prana, whatever we call it, which is what the ancients have been saying. So our job is to take these scriptures and then start providing use the scientific method and start finding evidences to it. I think that's what we've been doing over the last 200 years, 300, 400 years of the age of rationalism and the Renaissance. Our goal has been to, prove from the time of heliocentricity of Copernicus to now, we've been doing the same thing, right? We're taking some idea which was ancient, and we've used the scientific method to say this is what it is. So this is how we prove it. And now we're going to the final frontier, which is consciousness, brain, intelligence, and all of that, which I think is which will take us to the next level of humanity, for human societies and all that, which I think is very exciting.
And for our listeners, I recommend this book by Heinrich Pass, who is a quantum professor of quantum physics in Germany. And he wrote this book called The One: How an Ancient Idea Holds the Future of Physics. And it's exactly what you are talking about. But now I would like to move on to, as I mentioned and promised you, to your other passion. I mean, the passion for quantum, of course, we can talk a lot about that. It's fascinating. But we are also interested here about your passion for blockchain, and you are a blockchain pioneer. I mean, you've done decentralization before it was called blockchain. And I would like to ask you first, what is fueling that passion? What was fueling the passion for decentralization?
So I think there's a beautiful Chinese symbolism which is called the Tao. You have the masculine, the feminine. So everything exists in duality in nature. And so when you come to extreme centralization, you'll also have opposing forces. So there's light and darkness. So I think the last 50, 60 years, we basically pushed the world towards a point of extreme centralization, whether it was money, whether it was proprietary software, whether it was data, everything was massively centralized. And so what we're seeing in the last 20 years, so my whole life, since 1996, I've been involved with open source and Linux. So, I started decentralizing software to then with the blockchain revolution of the peer-to-peer foundation where Satoshi published the Bitcoin client to now decentralize AI. So my whole life has been about this. And so I'm not saying decentralization is great and centralization is bad, but I'm saying that there has to be an opposing force that balances out. Everything in the universe exists in a balance. And so when the force of centralization is too strong, right? So in 2008, we saw the financial crises and what led to it. And then Satoshi Nakamoto published this white paper where humanity can actually own its own money. The first iteration for humanity to own its own value, a store of value, a medium of exchange, and representation of value, and it's created by humans for humans across humanity. And so this was, the first sort of shot that was fired. And then people started saying, why should we have centralized institutions? Why don't we have DAOs? Why should we have centralized governments? Why don't we have DAOs? So, I mean, that's an extreme example. I think there are a lot of benefits of centralization. There are a lot of great things about centralization. We need order. We need structure. I believe in fair use of governments, institutions, strong institutions with good oversights and all that. All of those things are needed, I mean, for the progress of humanity. But we've also seen this massive push towards decentralization. So we are coming to the era of humanity where we have to go to the next level of technological productivity, and that'll come through things like AI. It'll come through disintermediation. The world economy is $74 trillion, out of which $7 trillion are rent-seeking intermediaries, who can be disintermediated using smart contracts, trusted computing, decentralized systems. So we're going to the next level of productivity in human societies. And I mean, the whole point of technology is to free humanity from the chains of labor. And I think this is what it is. So decentralization will help fuel the movement towards that faster. So
Yes, and unleash everyone's natural talents and enable them to use that and create wealth based on that versus being a cog into a centralized system. Totally, we are with you here. And, so in that regard, of course, we are like Singularity Net. We believe in decentralization. In, let's say, if I'm a talented AI developer, I'd rather put my AI, let's say, learning algorithm or something on this platform, on this marketplace. So people, if they use it, I'm going to be rewarded. And rather than being a cog in the, let's say, Google machine or Meta machine. So, what do you think is the intersection of blockchain and AI, and how do they work together?
well, it's a great question, Miela, because I think this is what is going to fuel the next wave of innovation, right? I mean, decentralization of AI. And, so the main problem right now is that, for AI, for models to work, it's all, you need data. You need to feed massive amounts of data. And this data is held by large institutions and governments across the world. So who owns the data controls access. Like, for example, if you want to build autonomous driving, you need to have road data. You need to have data that's coming out from sensors and the cameras in these vehicles. And there's massive amounts of data is held by a few institutions, right? They all monopoly over the data. So with decentralization, you have data marketplaces where anybody who wants to build models, better models, push the frontier, has access to data. Like, for example, your Ocean Protocol, started by a friend of mine. And so, I mean, their whole goal was to create open data marketplaces. So, not just institutions, anybody who wants to, like, further clean the data, make the data better, build models on top of it is able to do it. The second thing is we've come to this, stage in humanity, Miela, where institutions cannot alone do the job of compute for AI, right? I mean, you can just keep buying more chips, but there are 4 billion computers in the world, and they're not always used. So it's like, if you go to Paris in the 1970s, you'd have taxis, but today Uber. So anybody with a car can drive. So you're increasing the transportation capacity in the city by 10,000 times. In the same way, if you want to have 10,000 times compute, you just can't keep building more silicon. You just have to use the silicon that's already there in a better way, better yield management. So I think decentralized compute is like the Uber of computation, for
Wow.
AI, which allows so which I think is an excellent sort of,
Yes, it
model
allows
instead of
everyone.
wasting.
Yes, like Uber allows everyone with a car to actually have their own business and make money with
Right,
that
right,
themselves
right.
without an
Mm, mm.
intermediary. Same with our marketplace, allows everyone to have their own algorithm as their own business. Yes,
Exactly,
oh, amazing.
exactly. So we need
Yeah.
exaflops of computing power, many exaflops of computing power. So I think decentralized compute companies like Hypercycle are great examples of what can potentially be done with decentralized compute and decentralized AI. So, the most important thing, of course, Mayala, that everybody is ignoring is AI safety. People are creating these AI models and letting loose. And we saw what happened with Microsoft and, basically crashing all the the airline reservation systems and airline scheduling systems. It's a great example of highly centralized systems where nobody knows. It's a black box. There are only 10,000, 20,000 people who work for the company who can basically look at the problem. Whereas the OpenAI and distributed AI, millions of people can look at the model, improve the model. If something goes wrong, somebody can basically diagnose it. So you're tapping into the intelligence of the world, essentially, which is why I think decentralized AI is going to be the future. I mean, the centralized AI will basically achieve its limits of growth, and it will have to go the decentralization way.
And of course, the incumbents, yeah, the metas, are bringing, of course, they want to kind of show off as well as doing something in that direction. And I think that's very good, and I salute that. But there's also a lot of confusion, yes. And I would like us maybe to be able to clarify for our audience, and of course for everyone who is listening in, which is not part of our usual audience, like our singularitarians. So OpenAI, is not open at all, and it's just such a farce to be called like that and not to be open. I mean, what they do, of course, is like Google is open. I mean, I can use it, everybody can use it, but actually it is totally centralized. On the other side, yes, Meta has now open source. Yes, and is open so has open source their very powerful AI tech, and that is something else. But that is not decentralization either. So maybe can we unpack and clarify for our listeners? I think with OpenAI is clear. It's closed. It's not open at all. But with Meta, so like kind of difference between open source and decentralization. Can you tell us a few things?
Yeah, I think you know, open source basically means open sourcing your code, your models, your source code. Giving access to your GitHub repositories, producing the results of some of the models that you've been running for, like a couple of weeks or whatever, using a compute. So all of that could be, considered open source. But decentralization could involve everything from the physical infrastructure being decentralized to even the development of the thing where it's not owned by an institution, because when the institution owns it, it basically guides the development of that particular product. But for example, I give the example of Apache, which uses the Apache software license, where anybody can come and modify, improve, commit to the Apache source code. So there is this book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar, which talks about this great example of centralization and decentralization, open versus closed. And so centralization is like, Meta and all of these guys. It's very like a cathedral. It's very beautiful. It's non-chaotic, but, you need the chaos in the initial days to innovate. You need generativity. If you want your product to be generative, if it wants to be adapted to multiple modes to do multiple things and multiple means, it needs to be open. You need to allow creativity and innovation to work on it. And that's why I feel both decentralization and openness are fundamental traits for innovation. I mean, I spent my entire life for open source. One of my friends joked at me. He said, you're probably the only human being to work for all the open source company. And perhaps it's true. I work for Red Hat. I work for SUSE, which is Novell. I work for the Open Solaris division at Sun, and then I work for the only Linux distribution PowerPC, which is Terrasoft Solutions, Datadog Linux. And so I spent my entire life, and then peer-to-peer foundation, blockchain. So my whole life, 35, 40 years of my life has been spent towards this, thinking about decentralization, all this. And it's just very hard to compete. Like 90% of the world today is run by some form of Unix and Linux. Apple, Macs are all Unix. They're POSIX compliant machines. And then 80-90% of web servers are internet are all Apache based, Linux and Apache based. So only the desktop computing and some, enterprise servers are Windows based. So if you want innovation, if you want proliferation, the way to do that is through open sourcing your technology. And we see that with Android. Android is all Unix and Linux based. So I think decentralized AI will go that way. When you open source, will propel this pace of innovation by sharing models, by sharing data, by sharing compute. It'll be more equitable and fair. So, but I'm not saying that there is no place for enterprises. Enterprises will have their own place. Centralized AI will have its own place. And decentralized AI will have its own place, and they will learn from each other. And there will be a synergistic coexistence of these two. And that's my understanding of how the future will look.
Amazing. And there is one more property of decentralized systems, and that is anti-fragility, which actually was proven that we don't have it, at least in cybersecurity, with the CrowdStrike event. And it all happened because everybody was using the same system, and that is a closed system, and it just had a failure. So it's like one point of failure. So can you tell us a bit about the anti-fragilities property of decentralized systems, and
Absolutely.
also for AI, please?
Yeah, I mean, Ross Perot, wrote an entire book about this called normal accident theory. Where it goes into theory of, how these systems are designed and how they're, how they fail and all of that. And so one of the fundamental ideas is no single point of failure, right? You cannot have, whether it's an institution, whether it's a specific technology within the software, you cannot rely on it too much. So the fundamental tenet of open source is a million eyeballs, like a million people looking at your source code. So if something goes wrong, they're able to quickly get in and then fix the problem and then make it better. And a lot of these open systems are very robust with their design. When they're fundamentally designed, they're designed to be more robust and more generative. So, as we see, like most mission critical systems today are run using Linux and Unix because you can strip them down, you can scale them down, anybody can do it. But if you have a company of 10, 20, 30,000 people, you can't build those systems. You're limited by the number of people working for you. So, so if you've real-time Linux, you've user space security, you've kernel space security. This is my life for 10, 15 years, so I mean, the whole operating system was designed with security in mind. File system level security, user space security, kernel space level security, what can execute in the kernel space, what can exist in memory. And, you have millions of hackers, security experts, all participating and contributing towards a common public good. So open source is a common public good, which is not owned by anybody. It's owned by all of humanity, and it's for human progress. And so that's why I think, critical information infrastructures need to be anti-fragile. And for them to be anti-fragile, the core tenet has to be open source. And I think humanity will learn it the hard way, because in a time when there's global conflict, nations will start using, these single points of failures. They'll take advantage of it, and it's just going to cause chaos. So the sooner people move towards open and generative information infrastructures, that are decentralized. I mean, Bitcoin is a great example. There is no single node. You have millions of miners across the world sitting on mining, right? The blockchain is distributed across computers. The DNS, the headless nodes, and there is no single internet DNS. So I think anti-fragility is a need of the hour. As we get 8 billion people on the internet, everything gets digital, everything becomes, online. I think we need to start taking some of these things seriously. And then, we see the lessons coming up every day, these failures of critical infrastructures on proprietary systems. So much to learn.
Amazing, amazing. And we kind of got to the end of our time here, and I wanted to ask you one of the last questions. But I would like to underline for our listeners that, first of all, I want to say that I'm such a, I admire and respect you as a human being so much, Karthik. You are really a wonderful human being. And this is number one. Yes, if we are to build, I think only wonderful human beings should build super intelligence, whatever that is, whenever we will know how to. But it should be modeled by the people who really have their highest values, yes, and can actually express them in their life. And you are a meditator. You mentioned that you actively seek to explore the spiritual side of life and to tap into those aspects which science maybe now cannot decipher exactly. And your philosophy in life is to love unconditionally and to perform at least one random act of kindness a day. I have seen this somewhere, either on your Twitter or somewhere. And you are constantly, you remember and appreciate the people who made your life what it is, which is unfortunately not so common. Yes, gratitude is something which not we have to cultivate. And unfortunately, in our narcissistic world and society, fueled by the social media, how platforms which are designed to actually stir the worst in ourselves. Yes, we are losing that, and I'm just so happy to know people like you because it makes also my life more meaningful. And your website, one of your websites was called Blockchain Monk, which I think it says it all by itself. So, but first of all, let me know, why did you choose this name?
So we'll get to answer your first question, blockchain monk. So the
Yes.
idea was, I meditated with monks, and the greatest people in the world who have the most clarity about life and everything else are the monks. And so I wanted to basically provide monk-like clarity to all my clients. So, so that was the idea, right? And Quantum Hermit was because I didn't get blockchain monk. My quantum company is called Quantum Hermit. So,
Yes.
so that it became
Amazing.
that, right? So, but I mean, Biela, thank you very much for your very humbling. I feel very humble to listen to this positive feedback from you. I mean, I'm a human being with many flaws, like every other human being. No measure perfect, but I feel that this whole one random act of kindness is a way of like going to the gym and training your body. You're training your consciousness, your prana, your soul to be a better human being, and that's the idea of doing this. I've been consciously doing it for the last 20 years. I try and inspire my friends to do it. It could be something simple like holding a door. Like when I used to be in San Francisco, I used to buy burgers for the homeless people whenever I could. So these are the small things, like that could go a long way. Donating to charity. So those kind of things. But I've many of my own flaws, human flaws, as you say, as you're born into the world, you live in the sensory reality. There are many things that, but we constantly have to work on it. To understand what those flaws are, constantly work on it. But not be ashamed of our human frailties. I think we all human. We all live in the sensory world. But the idea is to aspire something higher, right, and then work slowly towards it, and inspire other people to be a good example as much as possible. But when people come and ask me, oh, I say that I have all the flaws that everybody has, like, I sometimes get angry a little bit, not a lot, a little bit. My meditation helps, and all the stuff that we have, like, yeah, if you're born a human, it's not easy living in this world. I mean, living in the forest as a meditator and living in, in the Vedic science is called sannyasa and samsara. The two paths to achieving nirvana, which is, the highest form of realization, and you can do both. But the hardest thing is the sannyasa is leaving everything, going to the forest and realizing the divine. And samsara is to live in this world and realize the divine. The really living in the world is hard because it's the day in day out, right? Like people are dying around you. There's old age, sickness, all kinds of things, right? I mean, jealousy, greed. Also, but we have to be aware of all of this. We need to appreciate the memento mori, that everything goes, everything is finite. We'll all leave, and we have this wonderful planet, and we're all human at the end of the day. I mean, there is no white, black, yellow, green. There's no Indo-Muslim, whatever. It's all stories that we've created. We're all one at the end of the day, and that's what it's all about. And that's what I aspire my life to be. I mean, to set an example. If I want to leave something behind, that's what it should be. To leave something of value would be to live a life like that, right? That this guy did not believe in any of these things. He helped everybody, did everything for everybody, contributed to, like in a very, very tiny way, towards decentralization, towards AI, towards all these things through companies and all of that. But very humbled by your words. I'm hoping to live up to it when I grow up. So when I
Oh,
grow
come
old.
on. And so now you answered usually what I asked kind of in the last question, which is you answered your meaning of life. It's clear, yes, you were working on elevating the human spirit and starting with yourself, which is actually, I think, it's my meaning of life as well.
Yeah,
And
massively flawed human being, is trying to
yes,
raise up to a higher
yes.
level of
We
consciousness.
all
It's
are,
yes.
yes,
So
of course. And, if you have any message, any final message for our listeners, I think from what you just shared, it's just so inspiring. Um,
I think I mean, we're looking at the world in a very chaotic times, and we just have to believe that all these are stories that we tell each other. I mean, the only real thing is love. And George Harrison has a song where he says at the end of the day, what matters is how much love you can give and how much you can get back. Right? Everything else is transitory. That's what it's all about. I mean, love a lot of people. Just give a lot, take less. Live a simple life. And then don't get carried away by the violence of the world. I mean, we are divine beings, we're spiritual beings. I mean, you know, uh, and at the end of the day, I mean, we just have to hope and aspire that all of humanity will rise up to that level of consciousness where all these wars and conflicts will become non-existent. And then we unite with everybody who's out there, out in the cosmos, going back to a greater family out in the cosmos. And that's our game. That's our ultimate destination, to leave the cradle and go out there. And in the minute we learn to, evolve our consciousness, we'll get there. So, yeah, if flawed human beings like me can do it, everybody can do it. So that's the hope.
You are very humble, but thank you so much. Yes, indeed, and this ties in, of course, with also with latest scientific discoveries, because Donald Hoffman and, as I mentioned, Heinrich Pass, those two books, The Case Against Reality and The One, are both uh, leading for this for science to acknowledge, first of all, that space-time is doomed, that there is one consciousness, and indeed we are all one. That's why the book of this quantum physicist is called The One. And let's unite, and thank you for the reminder. Love is all there is. Thank you so much, Kartik,
Thank you,
for
Mela.
this amazing conversation. And I hope to have you back soon on our podcast.
Look forward. Thank you.